Hello and welcome to Spare a Thought. My name is Tom Spare, your host. In each episode of this podcast, I interview interesting people who are doing important work in areas of society that are often misrepresented or underreported in the media. In the third episode of this series, I wanted to focus on international university students, a topic really close to my heart. There's a lot to cover, so I've divided the topic up into a few parts. In part one, I interviewed Julie Campbell, International Student Advisory Manager at Ulster University, to talk about the challenges that international students face before, during, and after their studies, and looking at some of the ways in which international students are supported through that. In the second two parts, you'll hear from international students themselves about their experiences of studying in the UK, and then we'll conclude with what happens when the international student experience doesn't turn out as planned. A lot of column inches and social media feeds have been filled talking about the state of the university sector. This year, it's estimated that around 40% of English universities will be in the financial red. Lots of institutions across the UK are slashing staff numbers to make cuts to their budgets. And the UK government are seemingly prioritising primary and secondary education as well as further education over universities. So let's talk about the numbers very quickly. Nearly 800,000 people are employed by the sector across the UK. Universities contribute £116 billion to the UK economy. That's roughly 4.5% of the entire economy. By the academic year 2021 to 2022, nearly 2.9 million students were studying at British universities. Of that 2.9 million, roughly 27% of that number are international students. That includes EU students, bringing a net economic contribution of £37.4 billion to the UK economy. Now, between 2010 and today, there have been 12 ministers for higher education in the UK government, countless changes in university policy. It's also worth remembering that higher education is a devolved matter. So when government ministers in Westminster are talking about higher education and universities, they're often referring to English universities. Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland determine their own fee and funding structures. Now you're up to speed on the state of higher education in the UK. Let's get into the detail with Julie Campbell and Spare a Thought for international students.
No, thank you for inviting me along today, Tom. My name is Julie Campbell. I'm currently employed as an International Student Advisory Manager at Ulster University based in Northern Ireland. I've worked in the UK higher education sector for just over 10 years now, primarily as kind of in specialist support and advisory roles here. But prior to returning to the UK back in 2013, I spent 10 years in academic and leadership roles in the Middle East and Australia. And I've been very fortunate to work in a variety of different educational settings alongside so many amazing people. And I feel that kind of experience, that 20-year experience, has really given me a broad and probably truly enriching perspective on the sector. But here in the UK, I've been, doing what I do for around 10 years now.
Cool, thank you. And I think your background speaks to a lot of people that support international students. That there's lots of people that I've met who've come to end up working in higher education through lots of different routes. And that's one of the great benefits I've always found working in universities, that particularly on the professional services side, it brings together a whole range of sort of talents and insights and interests. Thinking about when you started working in the higher education sector, what were the sort of main features? Can you sort of remember where universities were getting their money from? What was the sort of mix between home, EU, and international students, and what were the sort of challenges facing the sector at that time?
That's a great question, Tom. And there has been a lot of change really over the past 10 years, not just in Northern Ireland, but across the UK. In terms of fees and funding, again, quite different. Back around about 2012 or so, I know the tuition fees were capped at around £9,000 in England. And I know that had been a really significant increase from the much lower rate. I think it was around about 3,000 that was introduced in 2006. But in Northern Ireland, fees remained, much lower for local students, significantly lower compared to elsewhere in the UK, while international students faced higher fees right across the UK. And while over the past 10 years, 12 years or so, the tuition fee cap has largely stayed about that slightly over £9,000 in England. I think one of the huge changes is the financial burden on students has grown massively, in terms of, inflation is outpacing loan value. And I know some universities have introduced more flexible payment plans and financial aids, for students and scholarships to try to, attract, a more diverse range of students. But I think that's something that's going to continue evolving, particularly in light of, Brexit a few years ago, our new government coming in. And I think it will be an incredibly interesting space to watch. Obviously, something else that's changed massively is just technology and online learning. I myself did I finished my degree and I completed my master's degree with the Open University, and that was approximately 22 years ago. And distance learning has it's completely changed. About 10 years ago, digital learning platforms were just starting to really gain traction. If you remember back, MOOCs were, really starting to become a part of learning. But face-to-face was still really the predominant mode of delivery across universities. And then COVID happened. The pandemic forced us to really speed up the adoption of those digital tools and online learning, and that's massively impacted where we are today. There are so many more fully online programs. Institutions are offering blended models of teaching, and they really are much more common than what they were from when I moved into the UK higher education sector 10 years ago. The investment that universities have made into Blackboard Learn and other virtual platforms, and the supporting with that digital infrastructure that they need to support remote education, investment in that has been absolutely phenomenal over these past 10 years. Maybe we should talk a little bit more about the post-Brexit landscape and the impact that's had on education past 10 years. Obviously back then we had Erasmus. There was a real growing focus on attracting international students. That was really probably more so for Northern Ireland, but it was really an up-and-coming thing. Universities were looking to, increase their revenue and their diversity of students. And at that time we saw more partnerships being sought out with European and other overseas institutions. And since the UK's exit from the EU, that's really reshaped that space so much in terms of recruitment strategies, with a stronger focus away from the EU, but attracting students from Asia, Africa, and the Americas. And universities have really had to ramp up what they do in terms of recruitment and their internationalization efforts, and really drilling down on these partnerships, the likes of 2+2 programs, these dual degree programs, and TNE initiatives that have really come to the forefront over the past couple of years. Impact of government policy. I don't think we can move on without mentioning that back approximately 10 years ago, maybe a little bit earlier, that government policy shaped higher education in a way that was really increasing emphasis on linking funding that was available to measurable outcomes like research quality, student satisfaction, and numbers. And the changes, I feel the changes in that have been very, really significant. Focusing now on employability, teaching quality. There's the teaching excellence framework that's in place now that we didn't have 10 years ago. Research impact. Also, the introduction of the Office for Students, OFS in England. Again, I would love to see that extended to cover all of the UK. Fingers crossed on that one. But it really has heightened regulation with an emphasis on your student protection, value for money, transparency. And as I said, I really, really hope that is extended, as I feel it shouldn't just be restricted to HE establishments in England. I think it's really necessary right across the UK if we want to continue to increase our standards and our international appeal. So I'll be watching the space on that one, Tom.
What are the main challenges that international students face when they're studying in the UK? Because often my observation is that it's not thrown up in the media that often about the value of international students. There's a lot about the value of universities, and there's reports out. Universities UK pump out reports all the time about the economic value, and I think they have recently billions and billions, 141 billion pounds or something to the UK economy.
Yeah.
But what are the main challenges international students face specifically?
As you said there isn't a great deal of understanding of the series of challenges that international students face right throughout their journey, from application stage to post-graduation stage. So I'll maybe split them down one by one. So the first challenge would be the actual application process. And, that application process in the UK will be significantly different to what, they have encountered in the past. Many of these students will, not have maybe pursued higher education before. It can be a completely new experience for them. Our process, the UK process, can be really quite complex with different, deadlines, different entry requirements, qualification equivalencies. For international students who are unfamiliar with the system, or who maybe haven't had a friend or a family member who've been with it, it can really feel extremely overwhelming. And many students actually end up using agencies and paying agencies to help with the process. Again, just adding an additional financial burden, because they feel it will be easier handing it over to someone else. And also the risk of them not making a correct application, or there being an error on it and their application being refused. That can be such a life impacting decision that a university can make to someone who's applying to them. So that's the whole application process. So that would be what I would say would be one of the very first challenges. And then they move on to they've got their offer, so they're pretty good. They know they want to come. They've been accepted. The next step is getting permission to actually study in the UK, and that's their visa steps through the Home Office. So the visa application process is, again, even more detailed than the university application process. It requires, financial proof, which is very specific. The university which they're applying to will require a suite of documents in order to provide them with a letter, or a form that we call a CAS, which is a confirmation of acceptance for studies, and that's required to be submitted with a visa application. And there are loads of other documents that a student needs to provide. And any delay in getting these, or complications such as your biometrics appointment, or if you need to go to a visa interview in country, can create so much stress and anxiety for students, especially when they don't know if they're going to be getting their visa application approved or not. So that is a huge stress on international students. And for those that get their visa, it is a huge weight off their shoulders, and then they move into Another challenging situation about actually getting to the UK once they're physically here, the logistics when they're on the ground. Many students have never maybe traveled outside of their home country before. They've maybe never been in the UK before. And facing those initial, even logistical challenges, getting to where you need to getting through airports, figuring out local, transportation, settling into your accommodation if you have accommodation arranged. It's so easy to feel disorientated. I've been an international student myself in a country which has many similarities to the UK, and it can feel extremely overwhelming when you're unfamiliar with a culture. So that can be a huge stressor, a huge challenge for new international students. An issue that we had a couple of years ago, probably from maybe the 2 years, which started to lighten up from this calendar year, it's around accommodation. There was a huge accommodation shortage right across the UK, and students navigating that piece, university accommodation versus the private rental market. What should I do? Costs associated with those, and the impact that can have on the financial support that they need from their family. Another very serious consideration for many international students. So let's say they've got their offer, they've got their visa, they've arrived. Next, it's just that settling in phase, adjusting to life, making friends, finding your people, overcoming homesickness and language barriers, which for a really strong student in their home country can really impact their confidence and their ability to be the best version of themselves when they get here. For many, first time living away from home, perhaps themselves, managing your finances independently, looking after your home away from home independently, accessing our NHS health services, opening bank accounts. It is so very different. And there are challenges that home students don't face to the same degree. For a lot of home students, they will have, parents or carers that are there to support them and help them get established. And really, they're only either a short flight or a drive or bus journey away. But settling in, we've seen firsthand that this is so crucial and that it can massively impact the well-being of a new student, especially during those first couple of months, just settling in and making those adjustments. Then throughout, so hopefully they're settled by this stage, and then we want to ensure that they have an ongoing great experience. Adapting to the UK's academic style. I know a lot of universities have specialist teams that support international students with that goal of academic, settling into that academic side of things. Even things that we take for granted, such as, referencing systems that we're familiar with, independent learning, critical thinking, group work, research-based assignments that we all take for granted. These can be very different to what international students have experienced before. And universities really need to make sure that they have, really strong support in these areas, because the financial commitment that an international student is making to study in the UK, they need to be successful. And on the social side of things, continuing to feel part of your university and a part of your community can be an ongoing challenge for many students. It can result in ongoing homesickness, mental health, and huge mental health impact. Students just feeling isolated and unsupported. In some cultures as well, students aren't really familiar with reaching out to student wellbeing services. So that can be a massive, massive challenge that international students just aren't prepared for. And then if they get through all of those challenges and they graduate, they have that certificate that they have been working so hard for so long and dreamed of. The next step is to be finding, work. So whether that be a sponsored job or they take up a position on the graduate route visa, the UK job market can be very difficult for international graduates to break through into. So navigating that graduate route visa or the post-study work visa process can be, quite complex, whether it be a sponsor route. Again, there are complexities with that. Also competing in a really tight job market, and being able to showcase not just what they have learned while they have been studying in the UK, those transferable skills that employers want so badly, and that really strong level of English language proficiency. That needs to be evidenced, and it's so important that international students that they engage with everything that a university has to offer. I often say to international students that they are paying a significant amount more than home students to get their degree, and that they must avail of every single service that a university provides for them. The majority of universities have really great career guidance services. They have the likes of what my team does, an international advisory team to give advice and support. But there are so many useful tools out there as well now. It is so crucial that at a very early stage that international students are aware of the services that they can avail of, that they are making use of those right throughout their time within those institutions to make sure that they are in the best possible position when they get to graduations. And I think that is something that can be, significantly improved within universities. I mean, getting that information and that support out to students so they know they can avail of it. Maybe just to move on to a personal note, at my university, at Ulster University, our team, so our International Student Advisory Service, we have really been thinking about this over the past couple of years, and trying to find ways and new innovative ways to get that messaging across to students to help them to be prepared as possible, but also that kind of longevity support in terms of pre-arrival, during their time, but also once they've graduated as well. We developed a bespoke preparation or transitions app that we require new international students to complete before they come, and that gives them support on expectation setting, on the academic side of things, in terms of pre-arrival, right the way through. So it's really highlighting services that we offer, what the students can do to get off to a great start, but also a great overall experience right throughout their degree. And we find that app alongside all of the other services that we provide, like we have buddy schemes, we do weekly catch-ups, we do a wide range of topic-specific webinars, that we're in a really good place now. That's been based on feedback that we've had from students who faced many of these challenges that I've just discussed. And we hope to continue to grow the support that we provide, but also share that with the rest of the UK educational community and the higher education providers. And I am a great believer that we should be collaborating with other institutions and sharing these ideas. And I know that's where the British Council, UKISA, for example, that they are really, vocal in this space. And I'm hopeful that we will continue to grow these relationships amongst institutions over the next few years to try to address some of these challenges that our international students face on.
Cool. And thank you for that really comprehensive overview from, the application process through to getting a job. I think there's a couple of things that I picked out there around, firstly, agents. So a lot of people listening to this might not be aware of the whole industry that surrounds getting international students into UK institutions. And there were accusations by the previous UK government about, the legitimacy of people coming.
Yes.
And abuse of the visa system, and actually it's very minimal. The abuse of this system is very different, and I would question sometimes the nature of the advice that the agents are giving students, and how much knowledge those agents have of the institutions, and there's a very delicate relationship that exists between agents and universities and students.
It is indeed, and it's funny you saying that, Tom. I felt exactly the same way. For many years, we would have had students coming to us, and the blame was constantly put on the agents. Oh, my agent did this, or my agent did that, or they didn't tell me this, or they didn't tell me that, and that raised a huge question for me about what actually were agents doing. At the start of the summer, I had the opportunity to go to Nigeria. It was primarily for a pre-departure briefing with students that were coming to Ulster in September, but I had the opportunity to meet with some agents, and I found it incredibly insightful in a really positive way. I was very surprised. My perception before I headed out was that wouldn't happen, and that piece of meeting the agents wouldn't really be of any value to me. But to be honest, that was probably the most valuable insight that I got when I was out there. Just seeing genuinely how they support students, yes, for a cost, or yes, for a commission payment, but it can be a really, really valuable service for so many students who are just nervous or uncertain about navigating that piece. And of course, like, any sector, any industry, you're going to get unscrupulous people, and there will always be people that take advantage of those who are vulnerable or who are prepared to pay. But as you said, it really does seem to be the minority, and I think steps have been taken out by many institutions within the higher education sector to quash out these unscrupulous agents and to part ways. But they will linger, but I think we've taken huge steps as a sector to move away from that negative piece.
Yeah. And also the fact of like Nigeria, for example, as being a big growing market for universities. And I mean, this is language which is used widely in the higher education sector about markets. And what we mean by markets is, the different countries which students are coming from. So that can be regional. So you could say the Middle East, or you could say China, or so on. And I think in one of my classes for my MA, one of my lecturers, we were looking at sort of future journalism, and Nigeria by 2050, I think, will be the third most populous country in the world. And the average age in Nigeria, I think, is under 21. I'm pretty sure it's very young.
It's incredibly young, young.
Yeah. So we'll probably see that, and we can talk about that a little bit later on about trends. Something I noticed while supporting international students was around mental health and isolation. There is, obviously, in the UK, we have a mental health crisis in terms of support that's for young people and people generally, and there's a lot of people struggling. But I think there is another element here, that there's this, a lot of countries culturally, there is a reluctance to even recognise mental health, and sometimes it's seen as a weakness. So, for example, I have a lot of Japanese family, and in Japanese culture, there is a lot of shame associated with showing weakness. And they perceive mental health as a weakness. I didn't know if you wanted to talk at all about that element.
Absolutely, and that is something that we see every year, and we have always seen, and it can be incredibly difficult to deal with. Now, I find in my role, and that and other colleagues across the sector who are in advisory roles will have experienced this. We work so hard with international students from such an early stage. So we really start our relationship with international students from that pre-arrival piece. So whenever they come to us and actually meet us in person, we are familiar to them, and we've started to build that trust. And then we work right throughout the time that the student is studying with us, maintaining that trust. So the students know that they will be heard if they come to us. They know it's a safe place to speak with their advisors. And we do a lot of work, yes, in promoting the the wellbeing services and the other support services that the university provides and the experts that are within those teams. But it's very difficult when they don't have a relationship with the students. And that's where I feel as though we have a really crucial role. International student advisors are so important in kind of bridging that gap. And being able to, first of all, identify when those students are in distress or when they need extra help and support. If we have relationships with students that have been ongoing, we genuinely do get to know individual students. It is a somewhat of a personal relationship that we develop with students, and we know when to have those conversations, but also how to approach those conversations in a manner that's appropriate for their culture. That we're not being insensitive, we're not, tackling this the wrong way. But you're right, it's not just a growing problem with home students. It's right across the world, and we really need to recognize within universities that it is worldwide. It is impacting our international student community as well, and to maybe provide more bespoke services, communication, again, resources for international students that are suited to their culture and what they're comfortable with and what they're familiar with. I think we have a lot of work to do in that space, but I hope that value is seen by senior leadership right across the the UK institutions, and that we're not just seen as a fluffy mothering service that provide trips and this and that it is a really important, valuable service. And those aspects, that fluffy stuff that we do, there is so much value in it to form those relationships and to ensure that those students don't fall down, or when they do fall down, that they know we're here to help them get back up again.
You've touched a bit on the rewards of supporting international students, seeing them from when they started or before they even arrived to get to graduation. And you've mentioned sort of the challenges as well. I don't know if you want to talk any more about the challenges.
Yeah, I'll maybe just I have talked about the role that international advisors play, and how important not just I feel that it is, that I know that it is, and that advisors know that it is, and international students know. But I suppose there's also the aspect I want to highlight in the role that international students provide in terms of promoting diversity and inclusion on our campuses, especially in Northern Ireland, where we are a little bit behind the rest of the UK on this. And we've seen over the past few years, as our international numbers have really grown in Northern Ireland, that there is so much value. We're seeing it firsthand, where there's so much value in the international student community in promoting diversity and inclusion. It's phenomenal. And I think we can continue to help create a more inclusive and welcoming environment for the students to get more involved. Now, not just within the university itself, into local communities, students taking up part-time jobs and volunteering, and maybe getting involved in different societies within the university, but externally as well, and being active members of their communities. With the unrest of the summer, which has been very, very challenging right across the UK for many, not just international students, but our communities, that we can do more to promote the benefits of diversity and inclusion. And I know that's something that we're going to continue to work on with local communities, and help to strengthen those connections, and to really help build that deeper understanding within the communities, and amongst our home students in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, I mean, it's I've massively benefited from, when I was at University of Kent as an
Mm.
undergraduate, we had very strong links with Europe, which again, has
Yeah,
changed. A lot of French students, a lot of EU students more widely. I recently, went to London to catch up with a Bulgarian friend of mine who's,
amazing.
to sort of celebrate their birthday, and also in my MA at Cardiff, have students from Ghana and India and Poland and Hong Kong, and it's Portugal. That it's just incredible to have these
Yeah,
different
absolutely.
um perspectives, but also the value in the classroom, um
Mm.
you know is very underestimated. That you know
Yes.
particularly from a journalistic point of view, and in the stuff that I've studied in politics and journalism, um, comparing political systems and how they work and what people's opinions are, and actually talking to Chinese students, for example, who
Mm.
feel confident to criticize the regime.
Yeah,
Um,
that's impressive.
yeah, people from different places are not homogenous by
Mm.
any means.
But that's fantastic, Tom. The likes of that example you've given there about your friends from China, that they have perhaps a newfound confidence to be able to speak about the regime, which is wonderful. Obviously, they feel very comfortable within their circle of friends, and that's partially down to the experience that they've had.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fantastic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty cool. Looking at the current trends, what does the future look like for international students studying in the UK?
Hmm.
And I know
Oh,
I want to try and finish maybe on a positive point, but we can talk about the nitty-gritty of, the general outlook really for international students in
yeah.
the
Look, I genuinely feel the future for international students, within the UK is, it's exciting and, it can be dynamic. I think there is an increasing focus on global mobility. And I think as countries are becoming perhaps more interconnected through business, that the UK, it remains to be a leading destination for international students, because of this. I think it's it's growing multicultural environment. It's really it's world class education. And I personally believe that we will see continued growth. Because the UK is, as I there is an increasing focus on global mobility and also the introduction of graduate route visa. I know there are options in different countries as well that can entice students, but I think this still is an attractive option for many, to draw many students to the UK. Hopefully, it's going to continue. Perhaps it might, change a little bit, but I think it helps the UK to remain competitive in offering opportunities for our graduates. Um, so hopefully that's not going away anywhere. The kind of focus of many HE institutions, as we discussed there, Tom, around student wellbeing and support services. And I think as we've recognized, there is an increase globally in perhaps it's the effect of post-COVID in terms of mental health support that is required on a global scale. I think that universities are recognizing perhaps the importance of this in relation to international students, and that could well be another feather to our cap if it's something that we're doing well to provide reassurance for students that it is something that we take incredibly serious across our universities, and that there is targeted support services around your mental health services, even those kind of cultural integration programs, to help students become more culturally familiar with the UK, and to help with homesickness and settling in. Tom, it is important to acknowledge the perhaps uncertainty around some immigration policies, post-Brexit,
There, there
post
was a
Brexit.
The
Yeah,
leader of the Welsh Conservatives famously
that's
said Brexit means breakfast. So
I'll take it. I'll take it.
yeah, I prefer breakfast over Brexit, to be honest. But there you
I would agree with you.
go.
Yeah, post Brexit. That'll be the last time I say Brexit today. And obviously, our government coming in as well, who are still betting in. Who knows what the effect that could have on, opportunities for international students. But I think that they need to move quite quickly, and they need to, get this boxed off so we don't end up losing international students to other countries. I know in the lead up to the MAC review that perhaps the UK didn't come across as the most welcoming of places because of some of the conversations that were taking place. And I think we have perhaps improved that somewhat over the past 6 months or so.
I do worry about it because there are countries like Canada
Yeah.
that are, really opening their doors to international students, and the European offer seems to be
Mm,
improving interrelations between travel between different countries within the EU as well. Um, and I just think that when the UK government is talking about growth all the time. And the previous administration did. This current administration is betting the house on the economy growing in order to make those wider investments. That the soft power of international students and universities really shouldn't be underestimated. Really, that if you want to make a trade deal with a country,
absolutely.
um, you know, uh, student exchange is one of the best ways of doing it. And is there a reason why India and China are so keen for their young students? And, American students, it's a bit of a different story
Yeah,
because there's so many hurdles for them to jump through to study abroad. But they have a huge internal market, so it's completely different. But for Chinese and Indian students, their government know that their students can go abroad and learn and return with ideas and insight that they didn't necessarily have before.
and absolutely, I think that's so valuable. And you know, a lot of students come to the UK with the intention and hope to stay in the UK, but I find it fascinating and really encouraging to speak to students, in particular students from Nigeria, I must say, that want to go back and give back to their country and improve their country, and they're incredibly passionate about it. So, I think, as I mentioned, I think we have a lot to offer, and I'm optimistic as long as we don't trip up.
Mm,
And we need to work hard at reversing some of that negative rhetoric that was out there, because it wasn't perceived well. We weren't perceived as a welcoming country for many prospective international students, but it's something we can work at.
mm, sure. Cool. Well, thank you for your time, Julie. I really
You're very
appreciate
welcome.
it. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
I'm
you.
ready for a lie down now.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. I'll
You're
just,
very welcome. It was really good to catch up with you, Tom. It really was.
yeah, no, great to
And I'm
chat to you
excited.
too.
I'm excited to see where you go and what you do.
Thank you.
I'll be all over your LinkedIn.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll definitely be doing lots of shameless self-promotion. So that's the end of this episode, Spare a Thought for International Students, Part 1. My thanks to Julie Campbell for agreeing to be interviewed as part of this podcast. In Part 2, we'll hear from international students themselves on why they chose to study in the UK and some of the challenges they faced coming to study here. The title track for this show is Young Shall Grow, credit and thanks to Afro Cluster, Magugu and Asha Jane. The show was researched, written and edited by me, Tom Spare, with additional editing and production by Lily Mott. This has been a Be the Change Media Network production. Thanks for listening.